Hey everyone, I'm Anya Esma, and today I want to speak to you about hexes and my opinion on hexes. So, as a witch, obviously, I have thought about that a lot. I have not done a lot of hexes myself, just to spoil that for you. And I will be talking about what a hex is in my definition, why people use them, and why I think they are important, and whether you should be proud of yourself for not hexing, essentially, because I feel like a lot of people are very proud of themselves for not doing it. So yeah, let's jump right in and talk about what I think a hex is. So to start out, I want to say that I see witchcraft very much as a tool for the marginalized and for people who have no other means of getting justice or getting whatever they want than to sometimes hex or to use magic and to use witchcraft. So that is sort of the framework that I'm speaking within. If you see that completely differently, you will probably not agree with me, but I do think that witchcraft is a tool for the marginalized and has been for hundreds of years. So how do I define a hex? A hex for me is a malicious spell cast with malicious intent that is meant to cause harm to another person. And that can be anything. That can be making their hair fall out. It can be for 3 weeks their food tastes like shit. It can be ruining their life, literally, making them not win the presidency. We've all seen that example of a hex in the past few years. And yeah, with Donald Trump, I mean, I realize that maybe people watch this like 5 years in the future and they're like, what is she talking about? Yes, there were a lot of people who hexed Donald Trump, so that's why I'm giving that example. So there's plenty of ways that you can hex. Some of them are truly malicious and terrible and intense, and some of them are just like little hexes, little curses, you know, they're kind of cute. Like saying that someone, every puddle that they walk by, they step into it, you know, that would be a hex as well. Now, for me personally, hexes are not protection magic. I think some people qualify them as that, and they are free to do that, but in my definition, something like anything that returns negative energy back to its sender, which is a protection spell to me, would not be a hex. Or something like a binding, that you don't want someone to do something to you, or you don't want someone to do something to themselves that is bad for them, for example, that would not be a hex for me either, because it doesn't have a malicious intent, it has a protective intent behind it. And I think that sort of makes the difference to me. But I know that this doesn't go for everyone. Some people define protection magic or return to sender magic or bindings as a hex, which I do not. Well, it kind of, I guess, depends as well. If you do a binding spell that is literally stopping someone from doing what is good for their health, I guess you could call that a hex. But I mean binding in the sense of, you know, protecting yourself, stopping someone from causing harm. All right, anyways, so let's talk about why I say that witchcraft is a tool for the marginalized and why I think that hexes tie into that very strongly. So there are 3 things that I think marginalized communities need the most, which first of all is healing from trauma that was caused by all the things that are bad in this world, meaning stuff like capitalism. Doesn't even just have to be trauma, it can also be conditioning. Always having to be perfect, always having to perform. Those are some of the wounds that capitalism and the obsession with performance that we have can cause. Then there's obviously colonization, and that goes for everyone. Whether it's white people or non-white people, whether it's people whose ancestors were colonizers or whose ancestors were colonized, everyone needs healing from it. That's just a fact. And the way that culture has been appropriated, the way that treasures, artifacts, money has been stolen, the way that some parts of the world have been kept to this day on purpose in poverty and in economic turmoil and in just terrible circumstances. All of that is in the end a consequence of the colonial mindset, and healing from that and healing from the things that it has conditioned us to think. For example, also as white people, many white people think, when we saw this with the recent refugee influx from Ukraine, people thought like, oh, this is happening in Europe. How novel! Like, war is not a European thing. Europe is superior to everyone. This is the sort of thinking that definitely comes from colonization and colonialism. So healing from colonialism, colonization, whatever you want to call it, is very important. Now, also healing from racism, which kind of goes hand in hand with colonialism, to be honest, but the mindsets that racism has taught to us, or even sexism, you know, all of these thought patterns that our society has created and that we all, whether we want to or not, sort of subconsciously follow, all of that needs to be healed from and needs to be questioned, and that is what witchcraft can be very, very useful for. Sorry, I went on a little rant there. So that was the first thing that marginalized people need the most. Now, secondly, is a tool to usher in change in a society, because a lot of the time marginalized communities are not the ones that are listened to by politicians or by society at large. So ushering in change is difficult with non-magical means sometimes. And the third thing is a tool to help them get justice if they cannot get justice in any other way. Because a lot of the time, if you are part of a marginalized community, or if you are part of any sort of any group that is not a white cis heterosexual male, you will have a harder time getting justice for what you want justice for, you know? We've had recent examples of that as well, but I will not get into that now. Yes, so I think these are the three things that people need the most. Healing from racism, colonialism, capitalism, all these negative mindsets that have been indoctrinated within us, then a tool to help usher in societal change, and a tool to help people get justice. And that is sort of what, or the role that witchcraft often fills for marginalized people. And I think hexes, as you can imagine, are very tied to that as well. Okay, I do want to make a little bit of a side note, which is that in my personal opinion, I think some people hex too often and too freely. Because sometimes there are legitimately ways that you could resolve something with the actual justice system, or by simply speaking to someone, or by resolving a situation in any sort of other way. Because I feel like as soon as you bring in your magic, as soon as you bring in witchcraft, it gives a lot of meaning to something. And hexing, very frequently, I just think it's not a good place to be. Just like I wouldn't want to sit there and send out letters saying, hey, I'm going to sue you every week. You know, even if I had a business and people were copying my stuff or something, I'm trying to find an example. I don't want to get into a space where most of my time is being used stopping others from doing what they're doing, or sending negative energy to others to keep control of my own life, you know? I think it's just not a good space to be. And I think sometimes we think like, no, hexes should be allowed, hexes are for everyone. Sure enough, yes. But you still can question yourself, you know? It's just like, do you want to live a life full of drama where you become bitter about everything and then keep that bitterness inside without speaking to the other person, or where you do speak to the other person and every week you have another drama going on in your friend group and you might be the source of it? Do you want to live like that? If you do, then you're free to do it, just like you're free to hex people every week or whenever. But I think for me personally, I would know that I'm not in a good space if I felt like that, if I felt the necessity to do that. However, of course, there is nothing wrong with a hex after self-reflection and thinking about its justifications and knowing the consequences that you might carry from it as well. And one more note on this, I believe that you really have to match the severity of the hex to the severity of the crime or wrongdoing, whatever you want to call it. And what I mean by this is that if we take magic out of the equation, we have to think about, if someone stole $50 from you, would you go and light their house on fire? Probably not. That's a bit of an overreaction, right? So making a hex match the injustice, if you really have no other option than to hex, is the best option, I think. So if someone steals $50 from you, you can hex some small money related thing, or you can hex some like minor annoyance onto that person, whatever. But I would not do anything more than that, because that just seems overly dramatic. And I think once again, sometimes we're like, yeah, hexing, it's all good, like we can do it, sure. But as I said, would you light someone's house on fire just because they did a minor inconvenience to you, or you are bitter about them, or even if it was a major thing that they did to you, would you light their house on fire? Probably not. So that's why magically apply the same rules. Just because it's easier to hex and you don't necessarily see the result presently in front of you, that doesn't mean you can do whatever you want and just hex whatever you want. You know what I mean? Because if you light someone's house on fire physically, you see the result and you're like, wow, that's a big thing I just did. Whereas if you do a hex that essentially does the same, it's kind of like, nah, just happened, you know? And I think that's a bad attitude to have. So to keep in mind the balance of that. Now let's talk about my personal journey with hexes, which is that I have never really had to hex. Which of course means some people might say, why are you speaking about hexes then? If you don't use them, why are you speaking about it? Because I have thoughts on it, because I've thought a lot about it. And I have done bindings before. I have done protection magic, which some people consider hexes. I do not, as I mentioned. And yeah, at least that I can remember. And if you follow me, you know that I often forget what spells I did. I haven't been in many situations where an injustice happened to me, where I feel like the only thing I could literally do was to hex someone. And now comes the big question, because I used to think like it used to be off the table for me. I would never hex. It's not off the table for me now. If I literally felt like I had no other way of getting justice, I might do it. And the thing is, do I think it makes me a better person that I do not hex? No. No, I don't. I think, and this is something that a lot of people have to become very, very aware of. I think if you've never had to hex, if you've never felt the inclination to do it, you have probably a very great amount of privilege, because you've never been in a situation where witchcraft was the only option, where it was the only option to get justice, to get revenge, whatever you want to call it. Because simply on the basis that I am white, unfortunately, I am safer in this society. Okay, I'm a woman, so that makes me less safe in a lot of ways. But still, I am aware of the privileges that I do have. Yes, I also think that I'm not very prone to thinking of hexing. If I were more prone to it, I probably would have done it. If I were more open to considering it as an option, maybe I would have done it. Maybe there would have been an injustice where I felt it necessary to hex, but I've never felt it. I never felt that urge to do it. And I think it's important to acknowledge, when you say I've never hexed someone, to think, am I marginalized in some way? And what is the relation of my witchcraft to my marginalization? in what situations would I want to hex or not hex, and also to be like, where am I not marginalized? Where do I have privilege? Where can I get justice other than through a hex? And reflect on that rather than to be like, I've never hexed anyone, that makes me a better person. It really doesn't. Unfortunately, in our society, the answers to these questions that I just asked, can I get justice, in what situations do I need to hex, etc., they are very much based on your sexuality, your gender identity, your race, the amount of money you have, and a lot of other factors. So yes, it's a very complex topic, and it can't just be covered by being like, I don't hex. So really what I'm trying to say is, for people who are proud of themselves for not hexing, I think they should really just think about where they are privileged, and they're more showing their privilege than anything else. Of course, there are also intensely marginalized people who do not hex, people who did not get justice for everything that happened to them, people who have no other option and still they say, no, morally, I just do not want to do it. And that's great as well. I just think we should not blame people for doing it if it's literally the only option they have. So yeah, either if you don't hex someone, you're very resourceful to get what you want in other ways, or you think of other ways to use magic that aren't hexes to get what you want, or you're privileged, or it's a mix of both. There's nothing wrong with that, but you have to be aware that it's different for other people, so you don't look down on them, and understand that they maybe have fewer options for justice or are in a different mindset, and that is why they would hex. And that is not a matter of like, oh, they are below you or they are not as evolved or something. It's literally just how the world is. So to sum it up, I want to say, number one, do not make people feel bad about hexing if you don't have a lot of insight about why they're doing it, how they're doing it, in what context they're doing it. Number two, do help people figure out whether a hex is the right solution. So let's say your friend comes to you and says, hey, your non-magical friend, hey, I want to light my ex's house on fire because I hate him. Would you question your friend? I would hope you do. And think about the relation and does the equation add up of someone breaks up with you and you light their house on fire? So do help people figure out whether a hex is the right way to go and how severe it should be. And the third thing is, just see hexes as one tool in your toolbox, but don't let it become the go-to, because I think that leads down a path that can be very intensely painful for the person doing the hexes. If you let yourself go down a path of always being angry, always being bitter, and always wanting to hex as the first option, that's just not a good place to be at the end of the day. That's all I have to say on hexes. Do let me know what you think. If you disagree or agree with anything I said here, I think it's a super interesting topic and probably varies widely across the witchcraft community. So let me know what your thoughts are. And thank you so much for watching. Do like the video, do subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you very, very soon.